So welcome again to Equality Illinois LGBT Equality Institute. We're so glad that so many of you are here with us today. We believe that our inherent, most fundamental, basic human rights do not end at state borders. And we're so lucky that in Illinois, we've accomplished so much from the hate crimes prevention law to the Human Rights Act prohibiting discrimination in the workplace, public accommodations, in housing. We have passed civil unions, and now in just a few days, the full Marriage Equality Act will be taking effect all across the state. But of course, those rights do not end, that's right, those rights do not end at state borders, and neither should the laws that protect our rights and guarantee our basic human dignity and equal treatment. And we wanted to take this opportunity to focus on the federal LGBT equality agenda and get a sense of where we are, what are the issues that are on the horizon, and what are our allies doing in Congress and in the executive branch. And with us today, we have three amazing panelists to give us that perspective. First, we have Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who is joining us this afternoon, who has been one of our staunchest allies from Illinois Congressional Delegation her entire career. We have Gautam Raghavan, who is the White House lead advisor on LGBT issues in the Office of Public Engagement. And we have Meg Gorecki, who is the Director for Region 5 of the Department of Justice, who is with us as well. Earlier today, we asked you as you were registering to submit questions that you had for our panelists on the federal equality agenda. Many of you have submitted them. We've combined them, based on sort of commonalities. I'm going to ask some of those questions of our panelists to begin with, but then we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions if there's time at the end, those questions that were unanswered. But first, I'm going to ask each one of our panelists just to take a minute or two to talk about LGBT equality agenda as it relates to their work. And Congresswoman Schakowsky will start us off.
Well, it's a great honor to be on this panel and to be in this room with all of you. First, just a huge congratulations. It may not seem lightning speed, the advancements that we've made in the LGBT issues, but in terms of other things in politics, it has been, particularly, of course, at the state level. And thanks to Equality Illinois for getting marriage equality in Illinois. Really fantastic. Very good. Thanks, Terry. Anyway, so I am one of the founders of the LGBT Equality Caucus in the House of Representatives, which now has a record 113 members. We're bipartisan. Well, we have one Republican. Ileana Ross-Laitman from Florida is part of the caucus. But we have gotten votes from some others in the House of Representatives. We're not going to pass more bills, even though we have the Respect for Marriage Act and ENDA on the agenda this session. But we're working to build our caucus and hold briefings on various issues, communicate with the administration, which has been very supportive, and just to educate our members and try and get rid of some of the objectors from the Congress altogether. And so I'm just really proud to have this as a major item on my agenda as an advocate and to work in partnership with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, and again, it's an honor for me as well to be on this terrific panel with such stars. So thank you for having me. Again, my name is Gautam Raghavan. I'm with the White House Office of Public Engagement, where I direct our outreach to the LGBT community. And I just want to applaud you for being here, for doing this. I think it's so important that we continue to remind our community and the broader public that we have so much work left to do. I remember last summer after the Supreme Court's amazing decision in the Windsor case striking down the Defense of Marriage Act, there was a lot of talk about, are we done? Is the movement at an end? Are we packing up our bags and going home? which is, of course, a ridiculous question to ask. Those are silly things to talk about. And for me, it reminded me of the words in the President's second inaugural address almost a year and a half ago now. And I remember being there in a cold winter day in D.C. with my husband and my father-in-law. We were in like the cheap seats by the honey buckets where there were protesters, and it was a little scary. But I remember one of the best moments was when the President talked about sort of the history of civil rights in this country. He had this phrase where he talked about from Seneca Falls to Selma to Stonewall, which were words I know that a lot of people remember and really resonated with them. But I think that reminds us that the work doesn't just end, right? We're still working on civil rights for a lot of communities in our country. We have to be vigilant, and we have to keep working at it for the LGBT community. So I think in the years ahead, it's an opportunity to almost go back to basics, to think about housing and healthcare and workplace equality. And there's so much work left to do, and I'm glad that we're going to get into Q&A about that. And also, I think, to the point that Bernard made about, our rights, our human rights don't end at state borders, nor do they end at our nation's borders. And I think it's especially appropriate to be having this panel today. It's International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. To mark the occasion, the President released a statement about our commitment to LGBT rights globally. And so I think, yes, we have a lot of work to do here at home, but we also have a lot of really important to do across the world where our LGBT brothers and sisters are really facing some challenging odds. So looking forward to the conversation, and thank you again for having me here.
Thank you. I want to thank my esteemed panelists for the work that they've done, because if it weren't for the White House and for Congress, and particularly Congresswoman here today, then the Department of Justice wouldn't be making the strides that they are making. Many of you know the Windsor case, of course, which was just referenced, and a lot of you are taking educational classes today on that. But many of you might not know that the Department of Justice on March 27th rolled out a Transgender 101 law enforcement training to educate law enforcement with respect to transgender issues, the first of its kind. The Associate Attorney General, Tony West, described it as a new kind of justice for the 21st century. This is what justice should look like, justice for all. And it was rolled out also with the Deputy Attorney General, who said not only has the time come, the time is now to begin addressing these issues specifically to the transgender community. Again, LGBT strides, but also specifically transgender. So I think that you'll see that in the work. Many of you might have taken Owen's class this morning, Transgender 101, and what I'll be doing here today is calling all of you to action. That's why I'm here today, not to educate the educators in the room, but to then take the information you have and the resources that we're going to provide and get those out to the community. We cannot prevent and educate on hate crimes at the Department of Justice without you. I'm here today to get community partners to assist you, complimentary, free of charge, trainings, whenever you want them, educational forums, bringing stars like these speakers out for you to get this information to your community. I've got a lot of stuff here. I'm going to be asking you for your cards because I want to email all this to you at the end of today's panel. Thank you.
So the first question is for Congresswoman Schakowsky. Among all the legislative agenda items for LGBT equality at the federal level, the most prominent one is perhaps ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which has been pending in Congress for decades. Right? It passed this time around. The Senate voted 64 votes, including 10 Republicans. It's in the House now with nearly 200 co-sponsors towards the 218 votes that we would need to pass it. What is your sense about its fate now that it's reached the House? And what can we do?
I think in this Congress it's not going to pass, and I doubt that we'll even get to it on the agenda. The Republicans recently had a get-together, and many of them have agreed that what they want to do, mistakenly, I believe, politically mistakenly, is double down on the social issues. So we elections really matter. That's really my message in general. Elections really matter, and we have to watch the positions that these members take. It's not gonna pass right now, but as Bernard said, it did pass the Senate. Bill 815 did pass the Senate in November of 2013. And of course, our goal is to elect enough to get those additional 18 votes that we need. It would be great if we elected at least 17 more Democrats, and then Nancy Pelosi would be the Speaker, and then we could pass the bill in the House. So keep your eyes on November.
And I do have a follow-up on that. In Illinois, we're very proud that every bill for LGBT equality has passed with bipartisan support, from hate crimes prevention to marriage equality most recently. And yet there are still members of the Illinois Congressional Delegation, both Democrat and Republicans, who are not co-sponsors of ENDA yet. Do you have any advice for us as community activists and leaders and what we can be doing to get the ones who are not yet co-sponsors from the Illinois Congressional Delegation to move forward to a yes?
Well, I think all the lessons that were learned from marriage equality and how you got that passed is what it's going to take to finally get members of the Illinois delegation. Certainly, I've been talking to the Democrats, and we do have a bit more work to do. But particularly the Republicans, this is a very politically dangerous position, I think, for them to take. That is to be against ENDA. You know, if they ever want particularly the millennials to be with them, they're absolutely going to have to change their position. So I would continue just to meet with them, to call and write, and everything that you already know how to do. We can't let up. There's a lot of work to do, and we just have to keep pressuring them. I think this is going to change, but it's all about organizing and people power.
Thank you. Now, the next question is for Gautam. Obviously, President Obama has been the most committed president to LGBT equality issues, from overturning Don't Ask, Don't Tell to supporting marriage equality and everything in between. This week, most recently, the White House announced support for inclusion of transgender service members as open service members in the military. Can you talk a little bit about where that support goes from here, and what does the process look like? It's not a law that Congress is required to overturn, it's a policy. So maybe you can tell us a bit about that.
Thanks, Bernard. And for those of you who actually came to the last session, we were talking about LGBT equality in the military for veterans. We talked a little bit about this. So basically what happened recently is, last Sunday, Secretary Hagel was actually asked about the military's policies on transgender military service, and he said he's open to reviewing the policies. And so we've since expressed our support for that. And I think I think what would be informative is to look at how Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, and to look at the process that the military took there of reviewing the policy, soliciting input from service members, from veterans, from folks for and against the policy change. Back then, and I was at the Pentagon at the time, a lot of folks looked at that process and said, why do you need this? There's right and wrong, and you should just do the thing. The value of that internal process, though, was to really solicit input and engage people and have a conversation about it. And as a result, when the policy changed, as we've seen, it's been sort of, as they call it in the military, a nothing burger. Like nothing's happened. It's been a relatively smooth implementation. So I suspect that's what we'll see again here. I don't have much more, since this is moving, as you can see, very quickly. I don't know too much more about what it's actually going to look like, but I suspect that will be a similar kind of process. And I think it's important also for folks to tell their stories. We talked about this in the last session, is that one of the in my opinion, one of the things that changed the conversation around Don't Ask, Don't Tell was service members talking and telling their stories and talking about what it was like to serve under that burden. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do as a community here to make sure that we're lifting up those stories.
The next question is for Meg. The Department of Justice oversees implementation and enforcement of many of the federal laws, including the Hate Crimes Prevention Act. And you mentioned earlier the Transgender 101 training that was launched by the department earlier this year. Can you talk a little bit about how that training is meant to fit into the hate crimes prevention and how it's acting out so far?
The department is committed to the Matthew Shepard James Berg Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, and in every state there's been prosecutions, successful prosecutions under that statute. And if you take a look at the jurisdictions, we now have jurisdiction over gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and disability cases. And every day in the news, you can take a look at what's going on, and you can draw analogies to any community. Last month, a man goes into a Jewish center, what he believes to be the target of his hate, and kills non-Jewish people. Under the statute, it doesn't matter whether it's actual or perceived, whether you're right or wrong. But then I ask you, and the department asks you, when we educate and prevent on hate crimes, what have you done to secure your house of worship? Or let's say, in that case, your Jewish center. I ask the same question. What have you done to secure your LGBT center, or your social center, or your social service center? Are you being proactive or reactive in educating and preventing hate crimes? This is one of the reasons that we're rolling out trainings, not only hate crimes trainings, but we have all kinds of documents. I have documents to email to any of you on securing your place, securing your center, taking those steps, making sure security's in place, getting training. Do you know your police chief? Do you know in your precinct who your commander is? Does he or she know when you're having a large activity or an organizational event where you might be the target of hate? When you ask yourself, okay, where would a Christian gather annually? December 25th might pop in your head. Or when would a Muslim individual go to a mosque? Ramadan. So what I'm saying to the LGBT community is, when do you get together? June, it's Pride Month, there's Pride events. We need to be proactive in preventing hate crimes, not reactive after they've occurred. And this is a big push with education, including the PowerPoint we just rolled out.
And I do have a follow-up question for you, and that is some of the tools you're developing, including Transgender 101, that's aimed at law enforcement officials, are they susceptible to a change in administration? So if suddenly there was a new person in leadership after that, and we had who is less friendly to LGBT equality, then what happens to these resources and tools that are LGBT inclusive now going forward?
So they're stuck with me because I'm a civil servant, and when you talk about policy changes versus resources, I think it's very different. When you have tools in place and programs in place, those don't shift with administration. The actual court cases, legal battles, of course, you can choose to proceed with a statute or not. But when you're talking about training and resources, it's the same. We have, responding to allegations of racial profiling. Well, obviously we have race issues in this country, and we're going to continue. Just because the focus might shift now to LGBT, it doesn't mean that we're not responding to allegations of racial profiling. So the programs that are in place will continue. And the nice thing about our department, the Community Relations Service, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And we're just adding tools to the toolbox. We're not subtracting any, and we're not subtracting resources. And with the web and access to this type of information, we're always going to have these programs.
Thank you. The next question is both for Congressman Schakowsky and for Gautam. There's currently a ban in place, a lifetime ban on gay men and bisexual men donating blood. Congressman Quigley in the Congressional Delegation from Illinois has been championing a repeal using both legislative and administrative tactics. Can you talk a little bit more about, what is the outlook of that, and other countries have moved forward with repealing the lifetime ban on gay men and bisexual men donating blood. What's happening right now, and what should we expect?
So, I'm happy to give sort of a quick update on what's happening at the administration level. I know this is an issue that the Department of Health and Human Services has been looking at for a couple of years now, and I have, having been in the government now a couple of years, I have appreciation for complicated issues. So I know that they're basically an advisory board sort of process that's looking at this. And I believe most recently they've actually had a couple of briefings on the Hill. I'm not sure the status of that, but I think it's going to be one of those things that's going to take some time to look at the sort of medical and scientific impacts of any change in the blood banks in this country. It requires a lot of work and research, unfortunately. So I'm hopeful that we're moving in the right direction, but I don't have too much more of an update beyond that.
So the next question is Congresswoman Schakowsky. And the question is about, first of all, to rephrase that, you have championed and co-sponsored every measure of LGBT equality that has reached Congress. One of the bills that's pending right now is Student Non-Discrimination Act, which would create a level playing field and prohibit bullying and harassment against students in schools all across the country on numerous criteria, including sexual orientation and gender identity. What's so controversial about bullying or fighting bullying that it is still pending in Congress after such a long time and has not moved forward?
Well, we had a victory with the Violence Against Women Act, and we asked the same question, right? Because we added to that same-sex couples to the Violence Against Women Act. We also added Native Americans and immigrant women, and unbelievably, it was harder to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act because of those additions. The Senate did it, and then finally, with enough pressure, really, from the community at large, from Americans making their opinions known, we were able to pass the Violence Against Women Act with those additions. I am hopeful that when we ask that question, what's so controversial when it comes to bullying, including LGBT youth in that, and it would also, in addition to outlawing discrimination and bullying based on your sexual orientation or identity, would also protect those who complain, who lodge a complaint because of that.
Thank you. The next question is from Meg. Department of Justice was charged with coordinating and overseeing the repeal of DOMA Article 3 amongst federal agencies and around the country. Could you give us a sense of how the full repeal of Article 3 has gone across the federal government? Are there still any glitches or anything that's still out there that's pending?
I think you'll see a transition federally. I think where you're going to see the issues are in state level, because that's where it's headed back as far as any statutory challenges and things like that. If you took a look at Michigan in the last 48 hours, they are filing amicus briefs there in the state of Michigan right now because the voters there had a ban, and now a judge has struck that down. And then you'll see the coalitions getting together to file amicus briefs on both sides. I think one of the trends that you will see in this area is the allies, will make strange bedfellows, the partners. You're going to see very conservative religious groups. I know in Michigan, 150 conservative African-American ministers have now aligned to say we're filing the amicus brief, and they've joined with other organizations to keep the ban in place. So you're going to see partnerships coming forward that don't have anything to do with political lines. They're going to be definitely aligned based on religious similarities or backgrounds in order to start challenging these statutes. You're going to see this, my guess is in 30 to 35 states as these go on, and the battles will start in state courts. Illinois may or may not be coming down in the next couple of years after we see what the legislation, what happens after we see marriage. But in the states, the battlegrounds like Michigan and California, you're going to be seeing a lot of those cases being filed.
What we're seeing now, in my view, is the last gasp That is, I think there are certain issues that have a stamp of inevitability on them. I would say comprehensive immigration reform is one of them, and by the way, as we know, there are LGBT issues also in that as well. So we're gonna see a continuation of marriage in more and more states. We're gonna see in the past, I promise you that. This is an issue that is marching forward, but what we're seeing now is the final resistance, I think, of people who just can't stand seeing these kinds of social issues change. But you know, we're winning, and we're going to continue winning.
Let's talk about winning and continuing winning. And since the Supreme Court struck down Article 3 of DOMA, there have been more than 70 court cases in 30 courts and 30 jurisdictions that have been filed. In virtually every single case where the court does rule, the courts rule on the side of marriage equality, including more recently in places like Arkansas and Idaho, in Ohio, and literally every corner of the country. Can we look first, maybe Gautam, you can comment on what the administration is doing or planning on doing to help along that process at the state level as well?
So, and it's a great question, and you know, it's so interesting to see how we can barely keep up with where the next decision is coming. I think we just got a notice a couple days ago that on what's today? Today's Saturday, right? So on Monday, Oregon's expected to see a decision or a ruling there. So it seems like every other day there's a new decision, which is really great, and I think a sign of our momentum. You know, from the federal government perspective, and this is probably more a question for Meg than for me, but I think, you know, where you have states that are expanding marriage equality, even in some cases temporarily, I think we've seen the Department of Justice rule that they're going to recognize those marriages. So this is what happened in Utah, in Michigan, and so I think it's important for us that we treat all legally married same-sex couples equally. And so that's what we can do to sort of be a part of this fight, but a lot of it will be at the state level. Meg, do you want to?
Can I ask a question? Section 2 was not repealed. What's the implication of that? Is there one?
I'd love to, give the right answer, and my fear is that I won't. And so we've got these issues. Like this is one of those questions. And this is why I love this woman, and I love her spirit, and what she's saying. Because and this is exactly right. I wish I had the answer, but I don't. I'm not the Supreme Court. I'm not the Attorney General, and so I want to remind all of you for where you're sitting from in this position. You're in an advocacy position. I'm in a neutral position. The Congresswoman is in an advocacy position.
So let me say something about. So there is a bill, Jerry Nadler, H.R. 2523, the Respect for Marriage Act, would completely repeal all the rest of DOMA. My understanding is that there's still some lack of clarity in some places about Social Security benefits, a little cloudy still, and veterans benefits, etc. So we need to get rid of the entirety, even as we move forward with these lawsuits. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
And for the reporters, that was Congresswoman Schakowsky.
And I do want to recognize that today is the 10th anniversary of the first marriage of a same-sex couple conducted officially in the state. It was in Massachusetts exactly 10 years ago today. And you are right. And even though sometimes it feels like we're moving forward with snail's pace, we have moved quite quickly, and especially in the past few years. When Illinois first passed our marriage law, we were the 15th state to pass it. By then it was signed. A few weeks later, we were the 16th state to enact marriage equality, and by then it will fully take effect on June 1st. There will have been nearly 10 more states that at one point or another started issuing marriage licenses.
Also, the space between civil unions and marriage, amazing how fast that was closed.
That's right. That's right. And earlier, Congresswoman, you expressed optimism that the will pass. And as my next question for you, it's hard to give up hope. And we do see other bills move forward, sometimes slowly, but including the current Congress that's controlled by Speaker Boehner, and do receive bipartisan support or do get to the floor to receive a vote. Short of waiting until the next election and replacement some of the anti-LGBT members of Congress, do you see any other path to securing LGBT equality at the federal level?
Well, to describe the change, Barney Frank says when he first came out, being gay was, not such a great thing. Now he says being gay is more popular than being a congressman. So there's a definite change there. Yes, I mean, I do think so. Even the fact that we have members, Republicans that are on our bills, and even Ileana, a member of the caucus, means that if politicians can do one thing, they can count votes and understand that, and it's not just people who are gay, lesbian, trans. This is about the support for those issues, which that's a majority issue now. So I think that we're definitely going to see changes regardless of change in the makeup of the Congress. But the speed at which this is going to happen means if the Democrats can take back the House of Representatives, it will make a big difference. Nancy Pelosi, who won over 20 years ago because she was an early champion of an anti-AIDS agenda out of San Francisco, who is a tremendous supporter of the community and these issues, it would be on the floor of the House of Representatives. There's no question. And given if we had a majority, I feel confident that even if there's some reluctant Democrats, it would pass. I wanted to make one other point. Mike Michaud, who is running for governor now in Maine, there was hardly a ripple when he came out as being a gay man, unless somebody knows different in the state. It was like, and kind of what else is new and what are his policies about creating jobs in Maine. The change is palpable, and so I think you're going to see Mike win in Maine, and you're going to see these issues pass regardless. So we just have to keep the pressure on.
Thank you. Gautam, back in 2011, Secretary Clinton stood at the United Nations and shared that gay rights are human rights and human rights are gay rights. And she announced the administration's position that in pursuing global diplomacy, LGBT rights will be a part of that process. Since then, we've seen Uganda, Russia, India, Brunei all move in a direction towards more restrictions on LGBT identity and expression. Can you talk more about how the administration has responded, what's in the works? Thank you.
Great. And for those of you who have not seen Secretary Clinton's speech in Geneva, it was December 6, 2011. It was, I'm told, it was her most viewed speech ever, that she'd ever gave as Secretary of State. It's incredibly powerful, and she stood up in front of countries from all over the world, many of whom are very oppressive when it comes to LGBT folks, and made that very sort of clear, sort of clarion call for equality. It was pretty impressive, so please go check it out if you have time. So on that same day, we did issue the presidential memorandum on international LGBT rights. And it was the first time ever that the US government has articulated some sort of a strategy to promote the human rights of LGBT people globally. So since then, we've done a lot of really great things. I don't need to get sort of into it too much. But I think what we're seeing, though, is a number of countries are I would say it's very cynical politics what's happening in a lot of these countries. These are not examples of, for example, sodomy laws that have been on the books for a number of years. These are politicians using LGBT equality as a wedge issue, and it's really, it's incredibly sad, and it's also a challenging issue for us to deal with as a U.S. government. So, for example, there's things that we can do that have symbolic value. So, when the president sends openly gay athletes as part of the Olympic delegation to Sochi, that sends a signal. When we send openly gay ambassadors around the world, that sends a signal. In the case of Uganda, what we've signaled is that we're looking at all the support that we provide there, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward. And it's like I said, it's complicated because whenever we make these kinds of decisions, we want to obviously first and foremost think of the folks on the ground and sort of listen to them and hear their advice. And so we're in the process of this review about Uganda to figure out what do we do. And I think you'll see some movement on that in the next couple of weeks or months. But I would say that it is challenging because a lot of the funding that goes there goes to, for example, HIV programs, maternal health. And so we have to think very carefully about how do you sort of make those decisions in a way that doesn't obviously endanger the people that we're trying to help, and that also doesn't make life more complicated for the civil society leaders on the ground. Because if you sort of, if the U.S. swoops in and makes a big decision, sometimes that's not a helpful thing. And so we want to be very sort of strategic and smart about that. So that's just one example. But certainly across the board, the State Department, USAID, have done great work. The State Department has a Global Equality Fund that is funding LGBT civil society groups all over the world. USAID has a Global Equality Development project that they're working on with a number of foundations to support this work too. So there's more to come. And again, this is a place, as I referenced in my beginning, where I think we as a community have a lot more work to do. But I think folks are beginning to realize how dire it is for a lot of our folks around the world.
Let me just say that members of Congress, 70 of us led by Representative Cicilline from Rhode Island, a gay member of Congress, sent a letter to the Ugandan president urging him not to sign the anti-LGBT bill into law. So members of Congress writing to heads of state and weighing in can also be influential and join with the administration in helping.
Thank you. Meg, over the past several years, we've seen some very high-profile, tragic consequences of cyberbullying that was aimed at LGBT or perceived LGBT individuals. And those are only the tip of the iceberg in terms of the cyberbullying that's happening. Can you talk more about whether the current laws that are in place, including hate crimes prevention laws, are adequate in providing tools, and if so, what those tools are to prevent or at least to stop some of that cyberbullying?
I think the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act is an excellent tool in place, but it has its limitations. First, it's a federal statute, and second, you need to have great bodily harm. And so when you see a lot of hate crimes or hate incidents, they start at the lower level. It starts at the verbal, it starts at the bullying, it escalates to the spray paint, the broken windows, your car being keyed, signs left on your doors, flyers, these things that don't fall within the federal statute. So then you have to turn to your state statute. Every state is different. Some states don't have them. Some states, they're just enhancers for sentencing. They're not actual statutes themselves. Illinois does have a hate crimes statute in place, which does allow for prosecution of these things. But it's educating yourself and the communities that you live in to know, first of all, what's the jurisdiction? Is it local jurisdiction or is it federal? Who do you call? Is it a local response? Obviously, if it's crime immediately happening, you call 911. Don't worry about jurisdiction at that point. But once you've identified, what the issue is, are you calling your officer around the corner, your local, or is it escalated to a point where it needs to be the FBI, state or federal, under those statutes? So I think education of the actual statutes themselves, and it takes a long time, to navigate all of this. But what is the difference between your local state's attorney, your district attorney, your city prosecutor, your assistant state's attorney, your assistant U.S. attorney, and your assistant attorney general? Because you all have them here in Illinois. You know, dissecting that alone, we need to have an entire, you know, forum with flow charts and all of that. So you've got to know that the laws are in place, but you need to know how to navigate those. But I would say the same thing statute-wise with, you know, education and the bullying issues, you know, in the Department of Education, or is it the state, you know, Department of Education? You need to know how to navigate whichever channels that you're in. It takes time, but that's exactly what these forums are about, finding that and finding those resources. I can help anybody with that. I have resources here that I can email to all of you.
I love that every answer that you have ends with, I have resources I can email to all of you. I appreciate that. For a variety of reasons, LGBT young people experience homelessness at disproportionate rates. And there's always a shortage of competent LGBT-friendly and safe resources for them. What is the Congressional and Executive Branch responses and actions that are planned to address that?
You know, Chicago and Illinois, well, I say Chicago because in more suburban and rural areas in particular, it's really tough. But in any case, the number of shelter beds are very, very few. Services are pretty scarce as well. And if you look at the Republican budget in the House, the Ryan budget, it's, the kinds of cuts in domestic programs is just absolutely shocking. So we need to press ahead, I think, mainly right now at the state and local level, both of which also have budget constraints right now. To increase those kinds of services for all runaway youth, but certainly there's a disproportionate number of GLBT youth as well, many of whom actually are forced out of their homes, don't have an opportunity in their own families, and it's there's some great agencies that are working with them, but clearly this is a big need right now that needs to be filled.
You know, and I just add to that this is another place where we certainly have a lot more work to do. Across the administration, we've had some good examples of agencies taking this on as a part of the work that they're doing. For example, we have the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness that's incorporated LGBT-specific work into their work. At HHS, we have what's called the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families that's prioritized this as well. Most recently, a couple months ago, SAMHSA, I'm sorry for all the acronyms, guys, but the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration released a module where they're working with a woman named Dr. Caitlin Ryan, who's at San Francisco State University, who runs what's called the Family Acceptance Project. Because we find that, as the Congressman said, a lot of the problems behind homelessness come from family rejection. And so they've been rolling out more work there. But this is also a place where we've tried to lift up examples of great local action. About 2 years ago, we did a White House conference on housing and homelessness in partnership with the Ruth Ellis Center in Detroit. We've done some work. In fact, we profiled Carl Siciliano from the Ali Forney Center in New York City as another great advocate for homeless LGBTQ youth. So there's a lot of, I think, opportunity at the local level to do more, but that's not to say that we're not going to keep working at the federal level.
Let me also just do a shout out to the Trans Life Center that opened, and to Reverend Stan Sloan and Chicago House for that work. And if you haven't been there, it's so beautiful and it's just gorgeous. And that's important, but still not enough places, not enough welcoming, and not enough beds, period.
I was going to say, because I was at the Trans Life Center last week, and I know Congresswoman was there at the opening and ribbon cutting, If you haven't been and you don't know these resources, you really need to connect. Owen, who did the Transgender 101, is the legal director, and so connecting these resources, number one, and the Department of Justice, where we worked on our Transgender 101 with Equality Illinois, one of the first places that we took it was the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, because the correlation there between homelessness and all of the other issues you have to face. If you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, then how are you going to know what you're going to do tomorrow? How are you going to be able to get health care down the road, employment? So one thing leads to the next. So again, it's knowing the resources that are there and connecting. And that's just areas that the Department of Justice wants to be supportive in any way that we can.
I do have one last question. We might have time for one more afterwards, so think of your question. And this last one, I think, is for Gautam, which is that as places like Brunei and Uganda and Russia move to criminalize or punish gay identity or LGBT identity or conduct, has that opened up the asylum process or changed the criteria to enable those people who are really in danger for their life to come to the United States and seek asylum?
Yeah, one of the great things that's happened actually since that presidential memorandum I mentioned is that the Department of Homeland Security has done extensive training for the folks over there that work with refugees and asylum seekers, and trying to train officers on how to specifically handle LGBT intake. The other thing I would note, certainly the Congressman mentioned that immigration reform is an LGBT issue, and it is, and we're going to keep repeating that. I think a lot of folks seem to have forgotten after DOMA was struck down that it's still an issue. Obviously, the issue for binational same-sex couples has been mostly addressed, but we still have hundreds of thousands of LGBT undocumented folks in this country that we need to care for. But a part of the Senate bill, I believe, is a provision of raising the cap for asylum seekers after 1 year. It's currently the case that after 1 year you can no longer file for asylum, and so that's an important part of that bill as well. So I don't know that the numbers was it specific about whether the numbers have gone up? I don't know that we know that yet, but I can certainly find out. But again, I think this is a part of our strategy around global LGBT human rights. It's not just decriminalizing laws, but making it easier for folks who are coming here to seek asylum or to be refugees in this country.
And we will take one more question before our time is up. So raise your hand if you have one. Great.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful experience. What I wanted to ask you, we've talked a lot about having eyes on the next election and the power of our votes, but there seem to be a lot of challenges that have popped up in recent years that range from a lot of gerrymandering to changes in campaign financing with recent Supreme Court decisions. And I wonder if you could comment on the impacts of those issues.
More than money, the 2014 election will hinge on turnout. Turnout, turnout, turnout. In midterm elections, non-presidential years, there's a drop-off, particularly in Democratic constituencies. And let me just say, it's about 3 to 5% is the drop-off usually. Not 35%, 3 to 5%, which is a manageable number. We know how to do turnout. And so it is really important that we do that. Clearly, the money has an impact, but I want to remind you that it was a factor in 2012 election as well. Karl Rove, I can't remember, $100 and something million, and Barack Obama won that election. And so I think there is, because of all of the social media, the ways of communicating with people, there are ways around the money. Obviously, it would be better if the Supreme Court hadn't ruled, even its latest ruling, that there are no caps on how much money can be given to campaign committees. This is not a good thing, but on the other hand, I still believe as an organizer that people power can win. So let us not use the money and the billionaires as an excuse for us to not do what really works, and that is the door-to-door, the registering people to vote, to get them turned out on election day. We have really good candidates. The number of gerrymandered districts is not enough to guarantee them that they keep the House. There are enough of the districts in play that we could win. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has over 50 districts in play. We've done excellent recruitment, and we can win. The New York Times is now saying it's about a 55% chance that the Democrats will keep the Senate. Nothing is automatic. It's about working our tails off, and you know how to do that to make sure that our candidates win.
I just want to add one quick thing to that, which is that, you know, in sort of the joy and elation last summer about the decision in Windsor, let's not forget there was another decision on the Voting Rights Act. And so we have to remember as a community that voting rights is an LGBT issue as well, certainly at the federal level and then at the local level in terms of what's happening in a lot of places around the country. And since I have the mic, I also want to just mention, you know, one issue that didn't come up a lot in this conversation is HIV. And I think that's another place where we have to remember to keep the work up. I know you guys here in Chicago do a great job in making sure that that's a part of the conversation. But nationally, again, we have to do more to just remind people that the epidemic is still an epidemic in our community, and that the numbers among gay and bisexual men, especially of color, and trans women, especially trans women of color, are still on the rise. So let's not forget that HIV is still an LGBT issue as well.
Thank you very much. You know, change does begin at home, and I'm so grateful to all three of you for taking the time to come out here today and speak to the local activists and leaders to educate, inspire, and encourage us to do more. And let's thank everyone.